The cafe smelled like old pastries and strong espresso, the kind that stuck to the corners of your mouth long after the cup was empty. I had my usual corner table, the one near the window where the morning light carved rectangles across the floor. I liked watching people shuffle past, earbuds in, hands in pockets, pretending the world was smaller than it actually was. She was there before I noticed her, mid-40s maybe, her hair a careful mess that still looked intentional, leaning over the counter, as if she belonged somewhere between the latte machine and the half-empty sugar jars. I recognized the way she smoothed her fingers over the counter, small, deliberate movements. She glanced up, our eyes met, and then she smiled, the kind that doesn't ask for anything but makes you aware of what you're missing. "Black coffee?" she asked, and I realized she remembered my order from last week. "Yeah," I said, voice caught somewhere between surprise and a half-smile. I looked down at my phone, unsent texts to friends who never replied, paused, thoughts waiting to be released. But nothing mattered for that second. She leaned a little closer, elbows on the counter, and the light caught a silver ring on her finger. I didn't know why I noticed. "Busy morning?" she asked, and there was no judgment, just that small, pressing curiosity that felt like it could undo you. "Something like that," I murmured, pulling my jacket a little tighter around my shoulders, though it wasn't cold. She nodded, like she understood, like she'd had mornings that felt just as incomplete. I watched her stir a spoon into her cup, the tiny clinks louder than the conversation around us. She laughed quietly at something on her phone, small, private, and I felt a weird pinch, a reminder that life kept moving, even when you tried to pause it. "Does your mom know you're here?" she asked suddenly, playful, teasing, though her eyes didn't laugh. They lingered on me, and my chest tightened, in that confusing way you notice when someone's fingers brush across your hand and you aren't sure if it should matter. I blinked, looked down at the table, caught the edge of a napkin between my fingers. I don't think she'd care," I said, voice quieter than I meant. My thumb brushed against the corner of the napkin, folded it awkwardly. Her gaze stayed, longer than necessary, and then her fingers rested, accidentally, I think, on my chest, just over the heart. I froze. The cafe's chatter blurred into a background hum. My pulse thudded loud enough that I could almost hear it. She didn't pull away right away, didn't say anything. Just stayed there, a pause in the morning, a wait I hadn't expected. I started, then stopped. Words felt fragile. So I just breathed, leaned slightly forward, and let her hands remain, feeling the strange, quiet gravity of it. When she finally withdrew, it was with a small, knowing smile, the kind that makes you feel seen in a way you weren't ready to admit you needed. I returned to my coffee, fingers wrapped around the cup like it could anchor me to normal life. But my mind kept flicking to that moment, her touch, the question she'd asked, the space she'd filled without trying. And then my phone buzzed. A message. Not from her, but the timing made my heart skip. I slid the screen open. 3 words. "We need to talk." I didn't know if it was a warning, an invitation, or something else entirely. I just stared at the words, tracing the rim of my coffee cup, wondering how quickly mornings could turn into questions you weren't ready to answer. The next time she appeared, it wasn't at the counter. She was at the small table by the window, sunlight dusting her hair gold, and I felt the pull before I even recognized it. I hesitated in the doorway, holding my jacket like it could stop me from walking over. "Thought I'd try something new today," she said, nodding toward the half-empty seat across from her. "I like to watch the morning from here." I slid in, feeling the table between us as both barrier and bridge. She stirred her tea slowly, fingers circling the cup, and I noticed a faint tremor, not from the heat, not entirely. "You ever get the feeling you're just moving through other people's lives?" she asked quietly. Her gaze drifted out the window, but not fully. It was the kind of question that made you want to answer honestly even if you weren't sure you should. "Sometimes," I said. "Mostly when I'm not sure what I'm doing." My voice sounded smaller than I intended. I reached for my own cup, tracing the rim with my thumb, careful not to look too eager. She smiled, a little wistful. "I moved here a few years ago. Divorced." Just learning to exist somewhere new. Coffee shops help. I nodded, imagining the stories hidden behind those words. The risk didn't need explanation. It hovered between us, age, experience, the unspoken boundaries. I felt it in my chest, a quiet tug that both frightened and thrilled me. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't need filling. She traced a finger along the edge of her cup, eyes flicking up to mine, and I caught a glimpse of something unguarded, something real. My stomach tightened, and I imagined what it would feel like if there were no barriers, no caution, no rules. I imagined leaning in, hearing her laugh close, feeling that warmth. But reality was there, the world outside this cafe, the judgment, the impossible clarity of what couldn't be. I shook the thought away, focusing instead on her small gesture, how she adjusted the sugar packet with gentle precision, how her hair fell in front of her eyes and she tucked it back behind an ear. "I've always liked quiet mornings," I said, quieter than a whisper. She looked at me, not amused, not expecting, just noticing. Then, without warning, she brushed her hand against mine, just the tips, a fleeting connection, but it lingered longer in my chest than in actual contact. I felt a current I couldn't name, and my fingers twitched, wanting more, daring to. She pulled back, as if testing boundaries, and gave that small, knowing smile again. "You've got that look, thinking too much." "Maybe," I said, trying to smile, failing a little. But the warmth stayed, lingering in the space between us, fragile yet undeniable. I watched her stir her tea again, and for a second, I imagined mornings like this stretching endlessly, a quiet, precarious intimacy. Then she left the cafe, leaving the air between us charged, waiting for the next time, for the next gesture, for whatever small, meaningful accident might bridge the distance. She was already there when I walked in, leaning against the counter with that same casual precision. Sunlight caught the strands of her hair again, and for a moment I forgot how to move, how to speak. "Morning," I said, trying to sound normal, but my voice felt hollow. "Morning," she replied, tilting her head like she was weighing something invisible. I slid into the chair opposite her, noticing the way she crossed her legs, the subtle shift of her shoulder, like she was measuring how close was too close. I traced the rim of my coffee cup, fingers tapping lightly, hoping it would anchor me. There was a pause. One of those long pauses that stretches across a room, filled with things neither of us says. I wanted to reach out, just once, but something held me back, and I knew she was holding herself back too. "Did you hear from your roommate?" she asked, breaking the quiet, casual, like we weren't teetering on the edge of something. I shook my head. "No. Busy week." My words sounded small. She stirred her tea slowly, watching me, eyes calculating, soft, and I felt like a child caught in some gentle scrutiny. Then the door opened, and a friend of hers walked in, cheerful and oblivious, carrying a bag of groceries. She straightened immediately, hands tightening slightly around her cup. I felt the pull of reality, the invisible line snapping back. "Hey, Claire!" her friend said, and she smiled, light, polite, everything professional again. I sat back, sipping coffee, watching her laugh quietly, noticing how easy it was for her to switch faces, how quickly the tension dissolved in the presence of someone else. My chest ached at the loss of that intimate bubble we'd almost created. The friend left, and for a moment, the air between us throbbed again, heavy with what wasn't said. I wanted to lean forward, to speak, to confess, but my throat tightened. I imagined leaning close, just a whisper away from her, feeling her warmth, the slight brush of her hair. She stirred her tea, eyes flicking up. "You look different today," she said softly, almost testing, almost nothing, and my fingers itched, hovering over hers for a second too long. We froze together, a shared glance that spoke more than either of us could say. I wanted to reach, but the hesitation held us suspended, fragile. Our lips, our hands, so close, but no, not yet. Her gaze dropped, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low, measured. "I should get going soon." I nodded, though I wanted to shake my head, to insist, to break this polite distance. Instead, I sipped my coffee, noticing the tremor in my hand, the way my pulse echoed across the table. We left the cafe together, walking side by side but just far enough apart that it didn't feel like crossing a line. My mind replayed the brush of her hand, the almost smile, the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't noticing. And then, at the corner, she paused, half turning as if to say something more, something forbidden, but instead, she just smiled faintly and disappeared into the street. I stayed there, frozen, the warmth of her almost touch still lingering, and the memory pressed against me, sharp and impossible. The park was almost empty that evening, a thin orange sun sliding behind bare trees. I walked beside her, hands stuffed in pockets, listening to the crunch of leaves underfoot. Silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable, just heavy with everything unspoken. "I saw you talking to that guy at the cafe," she said suddenly, her voice soft, almost swallowed by the wind. She didn't look at me. I stopped, glancing down at the path. "Oh. He's just a friend. Coffee sometimes." My words felt weak, brittle, inadequate. She sighed, letting the sound trail into the air like a question I couldn't answer. "I don't like feeling like I'm just a moment you can step around." I wanted to reach out, to say something honest, something that would untangle the knot in my chest. But my fingers stayed hidden in my pockets, stiff, as if the very act of moving might betray me. Her steps slowed, matching mine, the distance shrinking by inches that felt like miles. I noticed the way her hair caught the light, the tension in her shoulders, the tiny flare of her nostrils. Something fragile cracked inside me. I started, voice cracking slightly. I swallowed, tried again. "I think about you more than I should." Her head tilted, a mix of surprise and something else. Relief? Apprehension? I couldn't tell. "More than you should," she repeated softly, almost a whisper, almost accusing. She turned to look at me, her eyes searching, steady. My stomach twisted. I wanted to step closer. I wanted to confess the ache I hadn't named, the nights spent replaying her laugh, the mornings imagining her hand brushing mine. I wanted to reach, but the world outside, the rules, the reality, pressed against me. She stopped walking. I stopped too. The space between us was small now, almost intimate, almost unbearable. I could see the flicker of vulnerability in her gaze, the same vulnerability I'd been trying to ignore in myself. "I don't know if this is right," she admitted, voice barely audible over the wind. Her fingers fiddled with the strap of her bag, curling around it like an anchor. "Does it have to be right?" I said quietly, though it sounded hollow even to me. The words were a half-confession, a dare, and a question all at once. She swallowed, eyes flicking to my face, and I felt her exhale, long, deliberate, full of something unsaid. The air hummed with possibility, the tension electric yet fragile. I wanted to lean forward, wanted to close the distance, wanted to hear her say it first, wanted to risk everything for a single moment. But instead, we stood there, frozen in the light, each breath loud, each heartbeat measured. And then she asked, almost inaudibly, "What if we just stopped pretending?" The words hung between us, suspended, impossible to ignore. My pulse sped. My chest tightened. The world around us blurred, the crunch of leaves distant, the wind meaningless. I opened my mouth to answer, and stopped. Because saying it, moving, crossing that invisible line, one step and nothing would be the same. I waited at the cafe the next morning, the same corner table, sunlight brushing the floorboards in familiar rectangles. But she didn't show up. I checked my phone, nothing. No message, no note, not even a hint. I ordered coffee anyway, watching the door, half expecting her to appear like she always did. Hours passed, measured in the clink of spoons and the hum of the espresso machine. The barista looked at me once, kindly, then returned to her work, unaware of the tension knitting my chest tighter. When she finally called that evening, her voice was different, guarded, careful, distant. "Sorry. Busy day," she said, but I could hear the hesitation, the weight of something unsaid. "Yeah," I replied, words small, too small for the churn inside me. No worries. She stopped answering questions about herself. Conversations became clipped, polite. I noticed the way she glanced at the door more than usual, the way her hands fidgeted with the handle of her bag, the way she avoided the small, lingering touches that had been natural before. I imagined all sorts of things: someone else waiting in the wings, a memory she couldn't forget, an unspoken responsibility that made her pull away. Each scenario hurt in a quiet, insistent way, a low pulse under my ribs. Days passed. I stopped showing up at the cafe at the usual time, walking past the windows instead, pretending I was busy, pretending I didn't notice her absence. Yet every missed glimpse, every unreturned glance, felt like a little echo of the mornings we'd almost had. Then I learned something. She had a child. I didn't know, hadn't known. That detail explained the tight edges, the distance, the careful choreography of her life I'd never fully been a part of. It should have made sense, I suppose. But the realization didn't bring clarity. It just made mornings feel longer, coffee colder, silence louder. I found myself pausing mid-step, mid-thought, mid-sentence, wondering if she'd return, wondering if I should go back, wondering if any of it had been real. I drafted messages I never sent, texts full of confessions and half-questions, nothing concrete, nothing safe. My phone lay on the table beside me like a paused heartbeat. I kept checking the seat across from mine, imagining her walking in, hair catching the light, smile uncertain but still hers. The empty space became a question mark I couldn't answer, a punctuation I couldn't ignore. And then one evening, just as the cafe lights dimmed, I picked up my phone and stared at her name. Fingers hovering, unsure, the message unfinished. I don't know if I set it down. The screen went dark. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. The chair across from mine remained empty. The cup of coffee slowly cooled. And for the first time, the quiet ache wasn't about what had happened, but what might never happen. She was on the doorstep when I arrived, shoes off, coat draped over her arm. The street was silent, only the faint hum of a distant car, and I felt the familiar tug of hesitation settle in my chest. Hey, I said softly, unsure if the word was enough to bridge the days that had passed. Hey, she replied, voice low, careful. She stepped aside, letting me in. The apartment smelled faintly of tea and old books, a softness that made the tension in my shoulders ache even more. We moved through the kitchen slowly, the kind of silence that doesn't press but waits, patient and weighty. I wanted to speak, to break the quiet with all the confessions I'd drafted 100 times in my head, but the words caught in my throat. She poured tea for the two of us, hands deliberate, careful. I noticed the way her fingers brushed the rim of the cup, a small habit, but it grounded me. I started, then stopped, eyes flicking to hers. She didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. And somehow, that was the invitation I needed. I've been thinking about you, I said finally. Not in a flourish, not in a declaration, just the simple, dangerous truth. Her lips parted slightly, a breath, a small acknowledgement. You know I can't, it's complicated, she murmured, voice wavering, steady only in its honesty. I nodded. I know. And I don't want to make it worse. I just needed you to know. She set her cup down with a soft clink. Her eyes met mine, steady, and I saw the same hesitation, the same ache I'd carried. There was risk in that look, risk in the possibility that saying nothing might be safer, but speaking could unravel everything we'd built, quietly, between stolen mornings and brushed hands. I think about it too, she admitted. A simple phrase, a raw confession, heavy with all the days we hadn't spoken, all the near moments that had hovered between us. I reached out, fingertips brushing hers across the counter, tentative, almost accidental. Her hand lingered, just a little, enough to anchor the moment, enough to be a promise that wasn't spoken aloud. The air was calm but charged, a quiet tension in the pause after words, the space between touch and pullback. I swallowed, feeling the weight of vulnerability press down, what could be lost, what might never return, and yet what felt undeniably right. She smiled faintly, a soft, human smile, not for anyone but for the fact that we'd said it. That small, brave acknowledgement of what existed, even if the future remained uncertain. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I echoed, letting the word hold the balance, the risk, the quiet triumph of honesty. We didn't need more. The tea steamed between us, warm and unassuming, and for the first time in weeks, the room felt settled, fragile but steady. The cafe still smelled of strong coffee and old pastries, though the light now fell differently, softer, as if it had learned to pause before touching the floor. I slid into the corner table at exactly 8:47 a.m., black coffee steaming beside me. She was already there, tea in hand, stirring slowly, just like she always did. We didn't need words at first. Just the quiet acknowledgement of each other, of the mornings we'd nearly lost, and the ones we hadn't. My fingers brushed the rim of my cup, and hers found mine across the table for a brief, familiar touch. No declarations, no dramatic confessions, just presence. The bench in the park where we had walked and almost confessed still existed. We sometimes returned there, mid-morning, when the sun angled just right, casting shadows that made the world feel private, ours alone. She laughed softly at something small, an observation, a leaf caught in the wind, and I felt that quiet warmth settle into my chest, steady and enduring. Life wasn't perfect. She still had her child, responsibilities that complicated our routines. I still had my own stuttered thoughts and habits. But we navigated the spaces between those edges, finding moments where touch, glance, or shared silence said everything words couldn't. I noticed small gestures again, the way she folded her napkin, the way her fingers lingered over the handle of her mug, the half-smile that told me she remembered mornings when we'd almost crossed lines but didn't. And I remembered mine, the nervous tapping of fingers, the way I traced the rim of my cup as if it could hold the pieces of us together. Sometimes we returned to the cafe, sometimes we lingered at the park bench, sometimes we simply walked through the city streets without speaking, comfortable in proximity, in routine. Those quiet rituals carried the weight of everything we had almost lost and everything we had earned. On one particular morning, sunlight spilled over the table, and I watched her stir her tea, eyes flicking up at me. I smiled faintly, and she did too, the kind of smile that had once been risky, dangerous even, and now felt ordinary and safe, but no less meaningful. It was enough. I sipped my coffee, feeling her warmth across the table, and realized that love didn't need grand gestures to be real. It lived in the quiet mornings, the shared cups, the gentle touches, and the routine of just being. And as we rose to leave, heading toward the park bench that had witnessed our near confessions, I thought, just for a second, that the world had finally paused long enough to let us catch up. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?